My name is Gideon Pogrund. I'm the Director of the Center for Business Ethics at GIBS, and very pleased to welcome Professor Phil Nichols from the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. Professor Nichols is a scholar in residence who's being hosted by the Center for Business Ethics. This is the third time that we've hosted him, and it is an honor and delight to do so. Welcome, Professor Nichols.
Thank you, Gideon, and as always, thank you for your gracious and generous hospitality here at GIBS. It's a wonderful place to be.
Phil, you know South Africa well. As I said, this is the third time that we've hosted you as a scholar in residence, but you've also been to South Africa on several other occasions. You, I think, are the only person I know who has read the Zondo Commission report cover to cover. What you would have seen during this week, and we, of course, have met a number of different people, but what you would have seen or what you would have come across is a sense of frustration and even gloom.
Yeah.
That seems to be pretty widespread. And that frustration and gloom is in response to a number of major challenges that we face, but one of them, and perhaps chief among them, is corruption. So let me start off by asking you a very direct question. How's South Africa doing in its struggle against corruption?
So I will answer that question with a couple of words, but I'm going to say a lot of words before that. It is both understandable and probably a good thing that people are angry about the real burden that's been placed on people here in South Africa. And it is absolutely natural and understandable that people are frustrated. And again, that's a good thing. It's not good that the situation exists, but it's good that people are reacting in a way that shows they don't want this kind of system to exist. And that's really important. Now, the anger and the frustration are absolutely understandable. And so it's going to be weird when I say South Africa is doing a lot of really good things with respect to getting a handle on and eventually controlling and getting rid of, to the extent possible, corruption. The Zondo Commission report, and I'm sure there are other people who've read it, we probably should form a therapy group together. It is a long, long document. And I consider it to be an extraordinary human achievement. There are lots of... The state capture was relatively unique. I mean, it is really unusual to see a kind of systemic, planned takeover of a government by a criminal, by a criminal organization. Now, they would characterize themselves as a business family, but what they were doing was a crime, and they were organized. But just with respect to corruption in general, the detailed, carefully documented, very thoughtful understanding of what happened, the dissection of what happened, this, as far as I could tell, 400 billion page long document that is backed up by roomfuls of evidence. That's an extraordinary thing. And setting aside the fact that it's extraordinary, it means that South Africa and the people of South Africa have taken a really important step towards understanding the manifestation of corruption in this polity. And you really can't you can't develop responses to corruption, particularly systemic corruption, unless you understand how it manifests itself in that particular place. There's no one single formula. There's no one single, this is the 4 steps that you use to solve corruption. Every place it manifests itself differently, and every response is going to be different. South Africa's taken that extraordinarily difficult step that a lot of places just don't take the time or make the investment in doing. And that's really cool. There's also a lot of really committed, really smart, really dedicated people that understand there needs to be a response and are talking together and working together. And that's also a really hopeful sign. So from where I'm sitting, as someone who doesn't have to daily experience the power shortages, the train delays, from where I'm sitting, when I don't bear these burdens myself, I can say South Africa is doing some really, really good things. It doesn't mean that an outcome will be perfect at the end, but the steps that South Africa is taking, the people of South Africa are taking, there's some really good things going on here. There's challenges, absolutely. And we could wish that the government were more on board. But to say that nothing's being done would be a lie. To say that the Zondo Commission happened and then nothing happened after that belies the importance of the Zondo Commission report, but also is probably not accurate as well. These things take time.
That's encouraging to hear. And we obviously need to think about how we can take that understanding, which to a large extent was the result of the extraordinary work of the Commission, and turn that into effective action.
Yeah.
An effective action that will be enabled by the remarkable people that you speak about. But let me ask you about the relationship between business and civil society.
Okay.
The view that many of us have is that government lacks the will and or the capacity to fight corruption.
Yeah.
Civil society has a long history of fighting against corruption. Civil society, as we know, played a critical role during the Zuma administration.
Yeah.
Business more recently, particularly through the crime and corruption workstream, has played a strong role. How can business and civil society collaborate in order to make a bigger impact in the struggle against corruption, and given the limitations of government?
That's an excellent question and an excellent observation about government. And we need to understand, or remember, because we all understand it, that in life, government isn't the beginning and the end. Our lives are mostly managed and conducted within the context of civil society. And in a place like South Africa, which is true of much of the world, our existence with respect to production, distribution, and consumption of services and material goods is largely done through business, which is a subset of society. And so we're already talking about two bodies that play a really, really, really important, the major role in our lives. Now, in the undertaking of any project, of any task, you can do it yourself, you can do it alone. But if it's a complex task or a task that requires more than just, you're looking for partners. And the partner that you want isn't necessarily someone just like you. You want someone who's got the kinds of things, and I use the word thing, which is a really generic word on purpose, but you want the partners that got the kind of things that you don't have, but you need. And that person's going to be attracted to you as a partner because you've got the things they don't have. Well, in what business has, if they do business well, and if they don't do business well, they're not going to be a business for very long. They've got resources. They've got experience in harnessing those resources. They've got experience in understanding discrete tasks and in how to unravel that task and create a plan. And business people use phrases like KPIs or, getting that task done. They're good at that. Civil society has a deep understanding of the society as a whole and not just the marketplace. A deep understanding of the frustrations and the anger. A deep understanding of relationships, all of which are really important in crafting a response to widespread systemic corruption like you experience here in South Africa. And so there's a natural partnership there, a wonderful partnership. Ultimately, you constantly hear that corruption requires both the corruptor and the corruptee, the bribor and the bribee. But it requires a lot more than that. It requires a context, and that context is society. We all ultimately control. And bringing together business with its resources, its experience, its understanding of how to get things done, and society, which is the context, that's a magical combination, and one that could go many kilometers. Notice that I used kilometers instead of miles. I'm trying to fit in here. Could go a long way toward getting around the problem that's created by a government that isn't necessarily demonstrating the kind of commitment that we might want with respect to this problem.
So there are natural partnerships which should be based on complementary and indeed synergistic understandings and skills.
Absolutely.
But the formation of those partnerships depends on trust. And we often speak about the trust deficit in our society.
Yeah.
Can you share some ideas or perspectives on trust building?
So I'm going to be a bit pedantic here and sound like a professor for just a minute. We need to understand that there's two kinds of trust. There's actually three, but there's two categories of trust. One is generalized trust. Trust in the system, trust in strangers, trust that things generally work. And then the other is personalized trust, but there's also something called particularized trust. So personalized trust is a trust between me and you. Particularized trust is a trust that I have for a certain kind of people. Perhaps I trust doctors. Perhaps I trust teachers. Right? So they're very similar. The creation of personalized trust is different than the creation of generalized trust. And generalized trust is so important. We don't fully understand how it's created. But personalized trust, I interact with you and under conditions of risk, and you behave in the ways that I consider appropriate, right? In other words, I trust you with something and you carry through. Well, so when we're talking about civil society organizations and business organizations working together, generalized trust is the background in which that occurs, but South Africa has really low levels of generalized trust. Many places do. The actual working together, though, occurs when there's personalized trust. And here we're talking about not trust between a person and a person, but an organization and an organization, or people within and people within, right? And we do know how personalized trust is generated. Working together, conditions of risk, behaving appropriately. The first part of that, working together, is kind of like the magic ingredient, the starting point. So business and trust is really important, but understanding and knowledge of are also really important. Businesses can't assume that every organization in the world is either just like them or just really weird, which businesses sometimes assume, Civil society organizations can't just assume that business people are evil, greedy, out in it only for themselves. Business people are people just like everyone else. And so, they need to understand and speak the language of the other and assume the best. But working together in small ways. GIBS is I'm not saying this because I'm here at GIBS. I'm saying this because I've observed it. GIBS is an awesome place that people come together and talk about things. And just talking involves a little bit of risk, right? The center that you run brings people together to talk. And that's a really interesting starting point. Small projects, very interesting starting point. Now, I understand that a lot of people in South Africa are saying, enough time, now we need to do. But talking and understanding and learning is doing. And man, we come up with much better solutions when we take a beat, when we pause for a moment to understand and to develop a working relationship than when we just launch into it, try to solve it right away.
Talking about coming up with better solutions, let me ask you a very fundamental question. Why do people engage in corrupt behavior?
We do not know the answer to that question. There are people, who believe to their core, like to their bones, I know why people are corrupt. And they will tell me that. Usually they ask me as a fake question, well, don't you believe that this is why people are corrupt? And I hear 4 million different theories about that. But there's also scholars who say this is why people are corrupt. There's organizations that are based on, well, it's weak institutions, or it's a rational decision that people make, or we don't know. We just don't know. We don't. We know conditions in which corruption is likely to flourish. We understand that there are combinations of things in which, some people are going to make corrupt decisions. If there's a decision making that's going on, if there's a disparity in power, that's a condition in which corruption can occur. But a lot of the times it doesn't. And people need to understand that as well. So, why did this particular person, back in the day, long ago, in a country in Eastern Europe, there was an office that was operating very cleanly, and then it became corrupt. You could go in and ask the people in that office, why are you taking bribes now? Why are you demanding bribes now? And they'd say, well, I didn't want to be that kind of a worker. I didn't want to be that kind of a person. But my family kept pressuring me. We want a new car. We want a fancy car. We want to walk down the street with the latest Western European goods. Well, that's a really interesting reason that particular office became corrupt. The office next to it, it'd be a totally different reason, or they didn't become corrupt at all. We just don't know.
That's a striking acknowledgement from someone who's been studying corruption for many decades.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I must not be very good at what I do because we haven't figured that one out.
Otherwise, you're very honest. But taking those limitations into account, what you would have heard this week in South Africa is huge frustration about the bad guys not being in orange overalls.
Yeah.
And this sense that justice has not been done, despite the remarkable work of the Zondo Commission.
Yeah.
You've spoken about the importance of social sanctions in contrast to legal sanctions.
Yeah.
Can you please elaborate on that?
Sure. And yes, when I last year when I was here, I started hearing constantly about orange jumpsuits, orange overalls, and I thought, wow, that's a fashion trend that just hasn't hit the Wharton School yet. And then I realized what they were talking about. And yeah, sure, it is frustrating that we have this massive body of information, this massive body of evidence, and yet no one. Again, as an outsider, rushing justice is not justice, and sometimes we need to be patient. But I understand. Your question is a really important question, because we don't, as we talked about earlier, the lives we live every day are not the government starts it and the government ends it. Most of our lives are lived in a social context, not a political context. To the extent, and we don't know why people are corrupt. We don't really know. I mean, we know a lot, but we don't know. But to the extent that there is any kind of choice being made, whether it's a conscious choice or an unconscious choice, if that choice does in fact reflect thinking about penalties, and that, that's what most people who want people to be in the orange jumpsuit, they're thinking that that's a penalty. To the extent that the penalties are important, the penalties that actually have more power in our lives aren't criminal penalties, they're social penalties. I am far more likely to be influenced by the likelihood that I will be shunned, or that I will be humiliated, or that I will be, in where I'm from, there's a lot of fear of being canceled. Those are all social penalties. And we, society, have the power and the authority to levy social penalties. So if, for example, and of course I never would, I were to stand up, and strike you across the face, that is a crime. And I would hope that I would be penalized for that. But the penalty I would bear more immediately, and the penalty that might be more important in my thinking about this, is I would be considered a horrible person. Again, as I should be. That my family would be embarrassed about being my family. My family is really the most important thing in the world to me. That my children would look at me differently. That my students in the classroom would think, I don't believe this person, because he's the kind of person who would do that. Those kinds of penalties are far more powerful than criminal penalties. And psychological, sociological studies find that over and over and over and over again. And so we can't, absolutely the criminal system needs to work. And the criminal system operates in a much different way than the social system. But we can't say, oh, the criminal system isn't working, therefore I'm helpless. We're part of society. We have a system that also imposes sanctions, and we need to do that.
It sounds like the use of social sanctions involves leveraging shame in some way.
Yeah, I get a little nervous about words like leveraging society, but yes, shame is a really important thing. Psychic costs, the costs that a person feels themselves are important. But I would broaden the concept of shame out. But shame's really important, yeah.
To shift the conversation to AI. Something else that I was going to say leverage, something else that could be used to help combat corruption. Can you talk, Phil, about how AI could or should be used to fight corruption?
Wow, there are so many ways. So whenever we talk about artificial intelligence or large data analytics or these kinds of things, we need to remember that we're at the very beginning of something that undoubtedly will transform all of society and the things that are the subsets of society, government, business, etc., in ways that we can't fully understand right now. I mean, it must have been so interesting at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution for people to realize, wait a minute, everything's changing. I wonder what that's going to be like 80 years from now. And they would have had no idea, right? We need to remember that we're at the beginning of this. And so how we maneuver, how we navigate, how we exist is all being figured out. But so a few things can be guessed at right now, or even there's a few things that are just very clear right now. The Zondo Commission, found just massive amounts of evidence. How one uses that evidence is really important, and the use of that evidence can either be done manually or it can be done with the assistance of machines. Decisions, figuring things out, drawing connections, understanding, parsing that evidence can either be done manually or with the use of machines. And when we talk about parsing it out and understanding it, we're talking about artificial intelligence. So just managing, understanding, learning, these are all things that we can use artificial intelligence to assist us with. Ultimately, decisions need to be left with us. But understanding is going to very much be helped. If not, it's only accomplishable using artificial intelligence. But then there's also, as we build structures to prevent what happened, or just the normal kind of corruption that we find, artificial intelligence can help us with that. It can also hurt us. There's real concerns about the use of artificial intelligence, but it can help us in, for example, basic forms of contracting or creating transparency. Transparency is a very difficult thing. We don't want everything to be transparent. Think about the concerns of privacy when we talk about artificial intelligence. You can't say, oh, privacy is really important, and then say, oh, we need to be transparent. There's a tension there, right? But transparency will be made easier when we're using, when we're mediating through machines rather than in back rooms. When the reasons for awarding a contract, or when the reasons for engaging are more standardized and reviewable, when the method of communication is something that everyone can participate in rather than just those who happen to have access to that means of communicating. So there's a lot that can be done, both in terms of detecting, but in terms of creating structures to prevent, that artificial intelligence will help us with. Now again, artificial intelligence is not a panacea. We do not yet exist in a world where you can just unleash artificial intelligence in a business firm and it will find the corruption. Hopefully no one's going to try to market a scheme like that. That's snake oil. That's fake. Artificial intelligence can't solve all our problems any more than government can solve all our problems. But there are ways that artificial intelligence will be really useful and probably already have been useful here in South Africa as well as other places in this beautiful world of ours.
So going back to the question of human agency, what role can the average person play in combating corruption in South Africa?
Care. Care is probably the most important thing every one of us can do. When we stop caring about it, then people get to do whatever they want to do. If we care, then that's the beginning of other people are on notice. Other people are going to be constrained. When we stop caring, when we say, that's somebody else's problem. I hate it, but it's somebody else's problem. I hate it, but what can I do? Caring is the most important thing. Now, from that, working together is important. Understanding is important. It's incumbent on all of us. I just used a big word there because I am a professor. It's incumbent on all of us to work together. This is our society in South Africa. This is South African people's society. They should understand that this corrupt person is not working for their benefit. This corrupt person is working for their own benefit. They may lie to you. They may say, oh, we're in this together. But you don't have 13 cars, and they do. You don't have a job because they've taken all the money that your job would be created with. They organize. You organize. Right? So working together is another really important step. Understanding is a really important step. Being engaged is a really important step. I get it that, you go to work in the morning, you come back at night, a cold drink of whatever, a little time with your family, that's the most important thing you can think of right then. But there's little things we can do. The corrupt local person is throwing a party. That food looks good. Don't go. That's a small thing that all of us can do. That corrupt local person is driving around in their car. Just frown. That's an important thing that all of us can do. Care, understand, work together, be engaged. And even in a tiny way, that's what makes our society. And corruption exists in the context of society, not in some different kind of universe that happens to affect our universe.
Amongst other things,
I sound kind of. I get it, but this is what I study and this is what I've seen all over the place.
Yeah. So talking about that, you've been to 110 countries.
Around, yeah.
Something like that.
More or less, 110 more.
And I know that in many of those countries, you've advised governments and institutions and corporations on how to fight corruption. We, I think, and you've noted this during your time here, tend to think sometimes about ourselves of South Africa as being kind of unique. And while South Africa certainly has characteristics that are different from what you get in other countries, there also are lots of similarities. So just reflecting on some of the countries in which you've worked, what lessons might be relevant to us in South Africa?
Not to avoid your question, but just to make very clear, I've had the extraordinary privilege of working with a lot of amazing people all over the world. But I really want to make clear that it's they who are doing the amazing things. I'm just helping in a tiny, small way whenever I can. South Africa is unique. But different parts within South Africa are also unique. And different communities within those parts are also unique. Every bit of the world is unique in and of itself. And as we talked about earlier, corruption manifests itself differently every place. But we can learn a lot from the experiences of other people in other places, even if they're not identical to what we're experiencing. And the lesson, the thing I would encourage most South Africans to learn from other places is corruption can be solved. There are places that have been at least as corrupt as South Africa. I would probably say even more so, but I don't want to diminish the anger and frustration and disrespect it here. Perhaps this is the worst. Perhaps it is. But there have been other places that have been really, really corrupt that are not corrupt anymore. It can be solved. It can be fixed.
That's encouraging. I know you've recently been in Panama, Colombia, Venezuela, and South Korea.
Oh, no, I haven't been in Venezuela in a while.
So thinking about the countries that you've recently been in,
Yeah.
and I think you've been in those countries for the past few weeks.
I know.
Any lessons that might be directly relevant to us?
Absolutely. I mean, there's really practical, just like structural lessons. I was in Bangalore, India a few weeks ago, and the universal electronic identification, the trusted electronic identification, I believe in India it's something like RDOT. And to any Indian person who's listening, I'm sorry I mispronounced that. It's because it's really important. The having a trusted electronic identification allows for the creation of all kinds of streamlined, non-human mediated transactions that reduce significantly or eliminate, leakage. In other words, corrupt theft of these distributions. Those are really simple. Well, not simple, incredibly complicated, but doable, structural kinds of things that South Africa should be looking at. And I know I don't want to say this is what you should do, but anyone should be looking at, not just South Africa. I mean, they're out there, and they're implementable, and we know and can measure the structural benefits of these kinds of things. There's also attitudinal lessons. In Colombia, where I was just before India, so a few weeks ago, the mindset of businesses is generally one of, we need to pitch in and rebuild this country after the Civil War, the brutal Civil War that Colombia endured for 50 years. And that's a mindset that other places should have after traumatic events, or after liberation, or after long periods. This kind of collective, let's just get it done. In Panama was gray listed, just as South Africa has been. And they took a very systemic, very structured, very business-driven. It was really interesting to see how business-driven this approach was to getting off the gray list, and they got off the gray list just a few months ago. There's the response that South Africa creates is probably going to be South Africa's response. It'll give expression to South Africa and the people of South Africa and the unique history of South Africa. and it'll fit the problems and challenges that South Africa faces, as well as the amazing resources that South Africa has to draw on. But why not learn from all the other experiences that human beings have had all over this planet? There's a lot that can be
yes,
learned
absolutely.
from.
Phil, you are soon going to be going back to Philadelphia, end of your visit. Any closing reflections?
Sure. The first, again, is the incredible hospitality of your center and of GIBS. And that kind of reflects the incredible hospitality of people in South Africa. I never fail to be humbled by how nice so many people here are. It is just I'm so overwhelmed by the people here. They're just great. The other is, it's not my place. It's not at all my place to say anything really. I'm happy, as are so many people, to be a resource and a help and an assistant. But if I were to say something, it would be, don't give up. Care. You can use aphorisms like "it's always darkest before the dawn," or if you don't get out of bed, I don't know any more aphorisms, nothing good happens, or you learn by getting up after you fall down. But all those aphorisms, they have a kernel of truth to them. We're all people, and it sucks. It's terrible what happened here, and it's still happening here. Terrible. But don't give up. There's so many ways that South Africa thinks and expresses itself and is so interesting, and some of those ways might be used to solve this. And then people will be turning to South Africa and saying, look what happened there. There's lessons we can learn from that.
That, I think, is a great note on which to conclude. It's been wonderful hosting you. We deeply appreciate your generous and gracious support for our work, and thank you very much.
Oh gosh, thank you, Gideon.